It's 2 a.m. You're not asleep. You're not meditating. You're not reading something that elevates your consciousness. You're lying in the dark with your hand on, your chest in a pulse, in your blood that doesn't care how many books you've read. The hunger is back. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for your spiritual practice to catch up. It just arrives, hot, insistent, older than language. And the worst part? You're watching it happen. You're conscious. You're aware. You see the craving rise like a wave, and you cannot look away. This is the curse no one warned you about. Awakening didn't free you from lust. It made you a prisoner who can see the bars. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will either break something open inside you, or it will confirm what you've secretly feared for years. You are not failing at awakening. You are paying its price. There is a stillness in you right now that no one taught you how to carry. It lives in your chest, just below the breath. It has weight but no name. You feel it when the room goes quiet and there's nothing left between you and the thing you've been avoiding all day. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You clicked on this video because something in you recognized. The title, not as information, but as exposure. Not as education, but as accusation. Somewhere beneath your curated awareness. Your meditation practice, your philosophical reading, your hard-won self-knowledge, there is a part of you that still wants, still hungers, still aches with a wanting that doesn't care how conscious you've become, and that wanting terrifies you. Not because it's wrong, but because you're watching it happen. You've become the kind of man who cannot simply feel anymore. You must witness yourself feeling. You cannot want without seeing yourself want. You cannot desire without hearing your own mind narrate the desire, analyze the desire, shame the desire, spiritualize the desire, and then, finally, feel hollow because the thing you wanted has now become a symptom instead of a sensation. This is the unbearable cost of awakening no one warned you about. You were told consciousness would liberate you. You were told awareness would set you free. You were told that if you just understood yourself deeply enough, you would finally arrive at peace. But here is the paradox that governs your nights. The more aware you become, the more fractured you feel. The more you see, the less you can simply be. The more conscious your mind grows, the more your body feels like a foreign country you can no longer visit without suspicion. You didn't transcend your lust. You didn't outgrow your hunger. You simply lost the ability to experience them without judgment, without surveillance, without the cold light of observation. Turning every pulse of desire into a wound. You must now explain. There are men who move through the world still sleeping. They feel lust and they act on it or they don't, but either way, they do not watch themselves from the corner of the room. They do not suffer the strange violence of consciousness, dividing them into the one who wants and the one who watches. You are not those men. You are the man who woke up too early, the man who looked too deeply, the man who opened a door inside himself and found not light, but a mirror. And in that mirror, an animal staring back at you with eyes you cannot meet. So now you carry both, the watcher and the wanted, the monk who meditates at dawn, and the beast who wakes at 2 a.m. with a pulse in his blood that doesn't care about integration, doesn't care about wholeness, doesn't care about the man you are trying to become. You are not here because you want motivation. You are not here because you want someone to tell you that lust is natural, healthy, and fine. You are here because you know something is happening inside you that doesn't have a name, something between shame and exhaustion, between hunger and disgust, between the longing for intimacy and the terror of being seen in your wanting. And no one, no therapist, no spiritual teacher, no lover has ever looked you in the eye and said, I know what it costs to be awake inside a body that still wants what the spirit cannot justify. So let me say it now. I know that awakening did not liberate you from desire. It simply made you a prisoner who could see the bars. I know that you still feel lust, sharp, insistent, sometimes unbearable, and that it shames you precisely because you thought by now you'd be free of it. I know that part of you wonders if you're broken, if all this inner work has failed, if the fact that your body still pulses with hunger means that the spiritual life was a lie, or worse, that you never really understood it at all. I'm not going to fix that tonight. I'm not going to tell you that lust is good or bad, healthy or sinful. I'm not going to give you a framework to manage it, a protocol to transcend it, a checklist to integrate it into some optimized version of sacred masculinity. What I'm going to do is show you why this is happening. Why lust becomes more complex after awakening, not less. Why the men who see the most often suffer the most. Why consciousness, rather than freeing you from desire, has instead trapped you in a labyrinth of self-observation, where every wanting becomes a wound. And maybe, if we go slowly enough, carefully enough, without looking away, you will begin to understand that you are not failing. You are simply standing in the exact place where the animal and the divine meet inside a man. And that place has no name, only pressure, only silence, only this. To understand what is happening inside you, you must first abandon the language of self-help. You must release the notion that you are dealing with an issue or working on a pattern. That language is designed to make suffering feel manageable. But what is happening inside you is not manageable. It is not even fully conscious. You are not struggling with lust. You are caught in a psychic civil war between instinct and awareness. And the battlefield is your body. Jung called this the problem of the shadow. But that phrase has been so softened by modern psychology that it now sounds almost friendly, almost cute, as if the shadow were merely a neglected inner child waiting to be hugged. It is not. The shadow is everything in you that you could not afford to be. It is the repository of forbidden impulses, buried hungers, repressed instincts, that did not disappear when you denied them. They simply migrated underground and continued to live in the dark. And the darker they became, the more power they accumulated. When you began your awakening, when you started meditating, reading, reflecting, looking inward, you believed you were expanding your consciousness. And you were. But you were also building an internal structure, a watchtower from which your ego could observe your own depths. And here is the cost no one told you. The moment you built that tower, you split. You became two men living inside one body. One man is the witness. He is aware, discerning, reflective, spiritually inclined. He meditates. He reads Jung. He knows that presence is more important than performance and that love must include shadow. He is the man you want to be. And in many ways you have become him. But the other man is still there. He is the animal, the instinct, the heat in your blood that doesn't care about integration. He is the part of you that still craves bodies, still imagines strangers, still wakes in the night with a longing that has no philosophy, no justification, no spiritual framework. He does not want to be witnessed. He wants to be, purely, blindly, hungrily. And now the witness has made him intolerable. You see, for most men, lust is simple. It arises, it pulses. It either gets expressed or it fades. There is no observation, no analysis, no internal courtroom. But you are not most men. You cannot feel lust without watching yourself feel it. You cannot want without asking what the wanting means. And that reflexive observation, that compulsive need to understand and categorize, is not freedom. It is hypervigilance wearing the mask of awareness. Your nervous system learned long ago to watch itself. Perhaps it was an unsafe home. Perhaps it was a parent whose emotions were unpredictable. And so you learned to track every shift in the atmosphere. Perhaps it was a childhood where survival meant self-surveillance, where you had to monitor your own impulses before someone else punished you for having them. Whatever the cause, you became a man who cannot stop observing. And now that vigilance has turned inward. Every flicker of lust becomes a trial. Every pulse of desire becomes evidence. And the verdict is always the same. You should be past this by now. You should be more evolved. You should be free. But you are not free. You are a fire without a hearth, burning inside a man who has forgotten how to let warmth simply be warmth. Jung understood this. He wrote extensively about the libido, not as sexual energy in the narrow, Freudian sense, but as the fundamental life force itself, psychic energy, the raw current of being that moves through every living creature. When this energy is allowed to flow, it brings vitality, creativity, passion, and purpose. But when it is repressed, shamed, or subjected to endless internal surveillance, it does not disappear. It turns inward. It becomes obsession, compulsion, shame spirals, numbness punctuated by unbearable intensity. This is what you are living. You have not lost your lust. You have dammed it with observation. And now the pressure is building behind walls you built in the name of awakening. There is one more layer to this architecture, and it is perhaps the cruelest. Men who awaken often do so because something in their early life required them to become conscious too soon. Emotional neglect, parentification, the need to become the parent's mirror rather than receive mirroring themselves. You learned, perhaps before you had words, that your feelings were not safe, that your impulses were too much, that you had to manage yourself so others could survive. And so you developed a watcher, not out of spiritual longing, but out of necessity. You became the kind of child who monitored his own emotions, tracked his own impulses, suppressed what could not be tolerated. And that child grew into a man who could not turn off the surveillance, who cannot feel desire without the immediate activation of the inner tribunal. This is not enlightenment. This is a survival mechanism that never learned how to rest. And the tragedy is this: the very hypervigilance that once protected you has now become the wall between you and the embodiment you crave. You want to feel desire simply, cleanly, without shame, without the watcher dissecting every pulse. But you cannot, because the watcher was never a spiritual achievement. He was a wound that learned how to speak. There is a grief in you that has no voice. It is not the grief of losing something. It is not the grief of failure or rejection or death. It is something more subtle, more corrosive, and far less understood. It is the grief of losing access to your own experience. You once lived inside your body without observation. You once felt desire without narration. You once wanted without the shadow of meaning darkening every pulse. That innocence is gone, and you do not know when you lost it. Maybe it was the first time you realized your wanting made someone uncomfortable. Maybe it was the first time a spiritual teaching implied that desire was a lower state. Maybe it was the slow accumulation of awareness, book after book, practice after practice, until one day you realized you could no longer feel something without explaining it to yourself. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. You have become a man haunted by the ghost of his own spontaneity. Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, the despair that arises not from external suffering, but from the inability to become who you truly are. He understood that consciousness, without integration, becomes a form of imprisonment. That self-awareness, taken too far without corresponding depth of acceptance, creates a self divided against itself. You are living that division, and it shows up in your daily life more often than you admit. It shows up in the overthinking of desire, the way you cannot see an attractive woman without immediately launching into an internal analysis of what your attraction means, whether it's appropriate, whether it reveals something shameful about your character. It shows up in the shame spirals that follow, ordinary human impulses, the way you cannot watch something explicit or fantasize about, something forbidden without hearing the voice of the watcher, accuse you of regression, of failure, of never really growing at all. It shows up in the emotional flatness that descends after you've analyzed yourself into silence. The way the fire dies not because it was expressed, but because it was explained. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He warned against the despisers of the body, the spiritual seekers who, in their quest to transcend, turned against the very vessel that carried their consciousness. He saw that this hatred of instinct, this shaming of the animal, was not holiness. It was fear wearing the mask of purity. And you know this. Somewhere beneath the endless witnessing, you know that your lust is not your enemy, that your hunger is not a failure of your practice, that the heat in your blood is the same energy that drives your creativity, your ambition, your longing for God. But knowing is not feeling, and you have been locked inside knowing for so long that feeling has become a foreign country. Rilke wrote, "Perhaps everything terrible is in its deepest being, something helpless that wants help from us." Your lust is not terrible. It is helpless. It is the part of you that was never allowed to exist without surveillance. And now it thrashes against the walls of observation like something caged. It does not want to be transcended. It wants to be witnessed without judgment, held without interpretation, felt without fear. But you do not know how to do that, because every time you try to simply feel, the watcher activates. Every time you try to drop into the body, the mind begins its narration. And every time you think you finally relaxed into embodiment, you realize you're observing yourself relaxing. This is the hell of the awakened man. Not that he feels too much, but that he cannot feel without watching. Not that he wants too strongly, but that he cannot want without judgment. Not that his lust is overwhelming, but that it is always accompanied by the ghost of consciousness, splitting him from himself. And so you stand in the strange twilight between animal and saint, too aware to be simple, too embodied to be transcended. This is not a problem to solve. It is a grief to carry. And you have been carrying it alone for longer than you know. You did not become this way by accident. The man you are now, the fractured witness, the self-observing animal, the consciousness trapped inside, a body it cannot fully inhabit, is the result of years of adaptation, decades of survival, a lifetime of learning how to exist in a world that did not know how to hold you. Every pattern you carry now was once a solution. The hypervigilance that now fragments your desire was once the only thing, keeping you safe in an unpredictable home. The self-surveillance that now turns lust into shame was once your way of managing impulses that others could not tolerate. The watcher who will not stop watching was once the only protector you had in a world that offered no protection. You did not choose this. You became it because you had no other option. And now, as an adult, these same adaptations have become the walls of your prison. You might notice that in relationships, you cannot simply be close to someone without analyzing what the closeness means. You cannot feel attracted without questioning whether your attraction is healthy, appropriate, spiritually aligned. You cannot surrender to intimacy because surrender requires the dissolution of the watcher. And the watcher is the only part of you that learned how to survive. So you stay half present, half intimate, half alive in your partnerships. And your partners feel it. Even if they cannot name it, they sense that part of you is not there. They feel the way you observe rather than participate, analyze rather than feel. And over time, the distance grows, not because you don't love them, but because you do not know how to stop watching yourself love them. You might notice that in sexuality, you have developed a strange relationship with your own body. There is heat, yes. There is hunger. But there is also the observer who watches the heat, monitors the hunger, evaluates whether your desire is noble or base. And so sex becomes a performance observed rather than an experience lived. You cannot fully surrender to pleasure because surrender feels unsafe. To the part of you that learned, safety meant vigilance. You cannot let yourself want without restraint, because wanting without restraint was, in your history, punished. So you remain split, the one who touches and the one who watches, the one who desires and the one who judges. And the result is a sexuality that never quite satisfies, not because the act is wrong, but because the observer drains the vitality from every moment. They become men who confuse intensity with intimacy, who mistake the heat of lust for the warmth of connection, and then feel empty when the fire fades. They become men who sabotage closeness the moment it becomes real. Because real intimacy requires being seen, and being seen means the watcher loses control. They become men who pursue desire compulsively, not from pleasure, but from the desperate need to feel something that the observer hasn't already dissected. You might notice that your self-worth has become strangely dependent on your ability to transcend yourself. You do not value yourself for who you are. You value yourself for who you are becoming, for the spiritual progress you've made, the shadow work you've done, the integration you've achieved. But this means that every time the animal rises, every time lust pulses, desire roars, or the body wants what the mind cannot justify, you feel like a failure. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because the old patterns have defined worth as transcendence, and any reminder that you are still human feels like falling short. You might notice that your ambition carries a strange weight. You work hard not from joy, but from the need to prove that the conscious man is also a capable man. You achieve not from fullness, but from the fear that without achievement, you are merely an animal in a man's clothing. This is exhausting, and it never ends, because the watcher never turns off, because the self-surveillance never stops, because the machinery of observation is not something you do, it is something you have become. They become men who cannot rest, who fill every silence with productivity, every stillness with optimization, because rest means sitting with the body, and the body is where the hunger lives. They become men who overfunction in every area of life, not from strength, but from the terror that stillness will reveal the animal they've been trying to outrun. There is another pattern worth naming, and it is perhaps the most painful. You struggle with boundaries, not because you don't know what you need, but because asking for what you need requires vulnerability. And vulnerability means dropping the watcher long enough to be seen. So you accommodate, you endure, you give more than you receive. And then resentment builds, not outward, but inward. Because you cannot be angry at others without watching yourself be angry. You cannot even have needs without the observer asking whether those needs are spiritually acceptable. You have become a man who cannot advocate for himself because advocacy requires presence in the body. And the body is the very thing you have learned to escape. They become men who disappear in relationships, who lose themselves in the needs of others because selfhood feels too dangerous, too exposed. They become men whose anger has no outlet because anger is an animal emotion, and the watcher has already condemned it before it can rise. How do you begin to unlearn what kept you alive? It starts not with transcendence but with witnessing. Not the surveillance witnessing that fractures you, but a slower, softer kind of seeing. The kind that does not evaluate, the kind that does not analyze, the kind that simply holds what is without needing to fix it. When lust arises, you do not transcend it. You do not shame it. You do not analyze it into oblivion. You simply feel it. You notice the heat. You notice the pulse. And you stay, without commentary. This is harder than it sounds, because the machinery of observation will activate immediately. The voice will start explaining what the feeling means. The watcher will try to reassert control. But somewhere beneath the machinery, there is a quieter witness. One that does not judge. One that does not explain. One that simply holds. This is not passivity. It is not indulgence. It is not giving yourself permission to act on every impulse. It is learning to let the impulse exist without war. To feel the fire without building a dam. To be the animal and the saint and neither, all at once. There is a kind of softness that masculine consciousness fears. It associates softness with weakness, with dissolution, with the loss of structure. But there is another kind of softness, the softness that comes after strength has failed. The softness that is not collapse but arrival. You have been hard long enough. You have been vigilant long enough. You have been watching yourself long enough. What you need now is not more transcendence. It is return. You have been at war with yourself for longer than you remember. The watcher versus the wanting. The consciousness versus the body. The monk versus the beast. And somewhere in the endless conflict, you forgot what integration actually means. It does not mean the end of desire. It does not mean the victory of spirit over flesh. It does not mean finally becoming the man who no longer feels lust, no longer hungers, no longer burns. Integration means the fire is finally given a hearth. Not contained, not suppressed, but held. Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is what you have been avoiding, not your spiritual development. That was always the comfortable part. The books, the practices, the insights, these were the figures of light. What you have been avoiding is the descent into the dark. The acknowledgement that your lust is not your enemy, but your ally in exile. That the animal in you is not something to be transcended, but something that has been waiting for you to stop running. That the shame you carry is not evidence of spiritual failure. It is evidence of a self that was never given permission to exist. Reparenting the inner child is a phrase that has been softened by overuse. But when you approach it not as technique but as grief work, its power returns. You are not fixing a broken part of yourself. You are returning to a child who learned that his wanting was dangerous. You are sitting with a boy who learned to watch himself before anyone else could punish him. You are telling that child for the first time, your hunger is not a problem. Your heat is not shameful. Your body is not your exile. This is not done once. It is done 10,000 times. In the small moments when lust rises and shame follows. In the quiet hours when the body wants and the mind attacks. In every instance where you catch yourself watching and, instead of continuing the surveillance, you drop into the flesh and simply breathe. Nervous system regulation is the foundation of this work. Not because it is trendy, but because the watcher was born from dysregulation. In a nervous system that could not feel safe, observation became the only protection. To heal, you must teach the body what the mind never learned. That it is allowed to feel without punishment. That the fire does not need to be controlled, only held. That the animal is not the enemy of the sacred. It is the raw material from which the sacred is forged. You will not do this perfectly. You will fail more times than you can count. There will be nights when the shame overwhelms you, when the watcher wins, when you return to the old war between flesh and spirit. But slowly, over time, the grip will loosen. Not because you transcended the conflict, but because you stopped fighting it. Not because you finally became the saint you imagined, but because you stopped demanding that the animal disappear. What you are becoming is not a man without lust. You are becoming a man who can hold lust without destruction, who can feel desire without dissociation, who can burn without burning down. You are not meant to erase desire. You are meant to hold it. The way a father holds a child who does not know his own strength. The way a fire is held by stone. The way the night holds stars without needing to explain their light. This is the integration you have been seeking, not through transcendence, but through return, not through escape, but through presence, not through becoming more spiritual, but through becoming more fully human. And here, at the end of everything you have learned, you may begin to understand the final paradox. You did not awaken to escape your humanity. You awakened so you could finally survive long enough to reclaim it. The fire was never the enemy. It was the guide, burning in silence, waiting in the dark, until you were ready to stop running and finally let it bring you home.